Hello and welcome to another edition of Film Club. And for these editions of Film Club, this is the first film review for the month of October 2017 where we're introducing Horror Fest. This entire month has kind of been inspired by Cinemasker's Monster Madness. That's where I kind of got the idea of it. And I know James Rolfe retired that whole idea and he's doing Son of Monster Madness, and I get it. I'm not personally trying to do 31 movie reviews for the month of October. With Horror Fest, I'm hoping to bring you some good quality film reviews of horror movies that I've watched recently, and they span many different decades and subgenres of horror, and that's going to be going on along with other content on this channel. But for this is Film Club, so we're going to go ahead and dive in. And the first film we're reviewing for the month of October 2017 for Horror Fest is actually pretty special. This is a Netflix original film. It is part of a 2-movie deal based on Stephen King's stories. This one is based on his 1992 novel, Gerald's Game. Right off the bat, the first thing I'll say is this is one of the most faithful book-to-film adaptations I've ever watched. And other than a few minor tweaks to present the story in a 2017 time setting, it is 100% accurate to the book. They really don't leave a lot out from the book in this movie, and that's really good considering I read this book over 15 years ago. I didn't remember all the ins and outs of it until I started watching the movie and the film went on. Now, if you don't know what Gerald's Game, I'll give you kind of the elevator pitch for it. It's about an older married couple. In this case, it is Bruce Greenwood. You might know him from doing many different acting jobs. He's always been a very good character actor. Also, for me personally to note, he has been the voice of Batman in several of DC's direct-to-DVD animation films, and he's always done a really fantastic job. And the wife is played by Carla Gigano, who I'm going to probably butcher her last name, but you will know her most recently. She was in the 2015 action movie with The Rock called San Andreas. She was the mom in that movie. These two actors already are fantastic in this film, and this whole story centers around they have a perfect marriage on the outside, but on the inside their marriage is falling apart. And in order to kind of keep it going, the husband decides that he wants to have a romantic getaway weekend. So they drive up to their cabin in the woods, so to speak, which is a cabin on a lake in Maine, in the state of Maine. And basically what it boils down to here is he pops a Viagra pill to get things going, and during this whole thing he handcuffs her to the bed because they want to spice up their marriage, and he ends up having a heart attack and dying on top of her. And so the rest of this film is her trapped to this bed trying to get out of this not only embarrassing but pretty scary situation, while it's also a psychological thriller because she has a bunch of hallucinations and stuff. It's a fascinating Stephen King book to begin with, and I was very impressed how they adapted it for a film, because I just really kind of thought, like, I don't know if this thing can sustain itself for almost 2 hours. It totally does, and it totally works. The other thing I want to note about this before we really dive into this film does contain a lot of stuff that has to deal with child sexual abuse, so if you're prone to be sensitive to that, this isn't a film for you. And I'm not trying to make light of stuff like that when I say that, but it does definitely go pretty deep into that kind of stuff, and there are a couple pretty disturbing scenes in this movie. Thankfully, I think they're done tastefully, if that's the word you want to use, but they don't really show, like, it more is led to your imagination than what's actually shown, which is always a good thing in these kind of movies. They don't go too far with it. I think for what the film's trying to convey, it's done as well as they could. Let's start from the beginning of this movie. We're going to run it down. At some point, I will tell you a spoiler section. I will stop, give you my rating of it, and then continue with the spoilers. So the beginning of this film, they're driving up to their cabin, and while they're on their drive, they see a stray dog. The dog's kind of like eating some sort of dead animal, and right here you get both of these people and how different they are from each other. You get the reaction of the wife, who says, "Oh, that dog looks really hungry, we should help it," and you get the reaction of the husband, who just doesn't give a shit about the dog. He just wants to get up to the cabin and get his. So they leave the dog, whatever, get up to the cabin. She wants to be nice to this dog because it's really not far from their cabin, so she cuts up a raw steak and puts it out for him. The husband gets pissed about that, goes out like, "Why are you giving this dog this expensive steak?" They go inside. It's important to note that when they go inside, they leave the front door of this house open. So they get things going. He pops a Viagra pill. All of that shit happens, and he has his heart attack and dies. Now, the difference between this scene and this scene from the book is, in the book there is no Viagra. What happens is, and they kind of do this in this movie, but they change it just slightly, not in a way that really is going to offend anybody. But in the book, there is no Viagra, and he has his, you know, thing where he's kind of almost going into a weird, like, he has kind of like a rape fantasy almost with this handcuffing thing, and she gets really upset about it because it brings up some really deep down childhood secrets that her husband doesn't know about. And so she starts pleading with him, take the handcuffs off, I don't like this. In the book, she kicks him in the nuts, and he falls over off the bed, hits his head really hard, his head cracks open, and he has a heart attack and dies. In the film, it's the Viagra pill that gives him the heart attack. She still does kick him and push him off the bed, but it is the pill that he took that gives him the heart attack, and he doesn't really crack his head open. So that whole thing happens, and yes, they still do, like, she definitely says to him, like, I think you have some sort of rape fantasy. She doesn't like that, and she wants the handcuffs taken off and all that. It doesn't happen. So she kicks him off, and he falls to the floor, and that's when she kind of discovers, like, oh shit, he's not kidding, he's having a heart attack. She's stuck in this situation. She has no way to get anything. Her iPhone is not across the room, but it's very far from her and out of reach, like, even if she's trying to use, like, her feet to get it. She's stuck to this bed. Now, as this is all going on, she starts hallucinating her dead husband. She hallucinates kind of a version of herself and another character later, which we'll get to. Now, also during this, that dog that I told you about makes it into the house, and he starts eating the remains of her husband. Now, thankfully, one thing I will point out about this movie, and I was very happy with how it was directed and presented, this isn't supposed to be a film that glorifies gore and violence, and I thought, other than one specific scene that is vital to the book and story, they do a really good job of nailing that there's not really a lot of gore and violence, because it's not an excessively gory story per se. So they did a good job. Like, a lot of times when the dog is eating her dead husband, it's more heard than actually seen. And I thought they did a really good job with that. So she starts hallucinating not only a version of herself, but also her dead husband, and they start having these conversations together. And she's stuck throughout this entire movie to the bed for about 2 straight days. Now, we are going to dive into what I consider spoiler territory for this film. So right now I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I'm giving this movie 1 thumb up. I'm not giving it 2 thumbs up because I think that with the child sexual abuse plotline that is presented in this movie, it's a hard pill to swallow, so to speak, when watching this film. And I really enjoyed it. I like this movie through and through. I think it's definitely worth a watch. And if you have Netflix, most of us already have it, you're not paying any extra for this, you should give it a watch. It's one of the best Stephen King adaptations. We already got a great version of It this year, and I think this stands neck and neck with it in terms of great film adaptations of books. The child sexual abuse subplot in this movie is hard to watch at times, and because of that, I highly recommend people that are prone to sensitivity surrounding that issue, or, you know, God forbid something like that has happened to you in your life, which I hope it hasn't. Do not watch this movie because it will dredge up some stuff. Anyways, we're entering spoiler territory for this movie. So during this time, it comes up in her conversations with her dead husband and the hallucinations that she was abused as a child sexually by her father. And so what happened is her and her father were spending a weekend together. The other parts of her family, like her other brother and sister and mom, were away somewhere. I don't think they actually explain where they were, but whatever, that's not really that vital. And there's a solar eclipse. And that's a big part of this movie. They go out to a park and they sit on a bench and they're watching the solar eclipse, and then it kind of turns into the, hey, you know, you're still my daughter, blah, 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 you should sit on my lap kind of thing, and you can kind of fill in where that goes. She's kept this suppressed for a while, and it also comes to light, and I was thankful that this part of her abuse is not shown in the movie, but it is definitely in the book, and they do allude to it happening. Apparently there was a part of her sexual abuse where she was also handcuffed to a bed. So they don't talk about that, or they kind of briefly hint at that in the movie, but they don't go into great detail about it. So that's a big subplot of this movie, is her prior child sexual abuse. So that gets trudged up, and she's having these conversations with her with a version of herself and with her dead husband. They continue, having these conversations. At this time, the dog is eating more and more of her dead husband, and now the dog kind of wants to eat her, and she's kind of kicking the dog off, like, no, don't do this, kind of thing. She's then visited by someone that she calls the Moonlight Man. This guy only appears when the moon is out and it's at night. Her hallucinations refer to this man as a manifestation of death, and that's fine, that's cool, and that this is a very pivotal part of this movie that makes sense later in it. So throughout this whole thing, she's hallucinating, she's having all these conversations and stuff. It finally comes real to her after like day 2 of being chained to this bed. I have to do something to get out of this situation. So there's actually a glass on the headboard above her that she maneuvers down and breaks, and what she does, and this is the one scene of graphic violence in this movie, however, they don't glorify it and they don't hover on it like some other horror movies. She actually breaks the glass and she uses it to cut her wrist and essentially deglove her hand so she can use the blood to lubricate her hand to get it out of the handcuffs so she can get out of this situation. Because it's either that or she's gonna die at this point. No one is coming to this house to save her at this point, and her phone is now dead. She has no way of even reaching it. So she does that in the process of getting out. And it's important to note that at one part, the hallucinations point out on the floor, there's kind of a blood trail from this dog eating her dead husband, and there's a footprint in the blood. This whole thing is very psychological. As she gets out, and she's trying to get out of the house and everything, the Moonlight Man is there, so she, in order to get around him, she gives him her wedding ring. And she's thinking she's hallucinating this whole thing. So she gets in a car and she's already exhausted and everything. She has an accident and people find her, whatever. So they flash forward at the end of this movie 6 months later. She's not hiding her story about her prior child sexual abuse anymore. She actually develops a foundation for helping other people that have had similar situations to her own, which I thought was a nice ending to that story. This is also present in the book as well. Now, the law firm wants to keep quiet what happened between her and her husband. They give her a very nice settlement with everything at the end in order to keep that quiet, because they don't want a story out there about how he died, and they keep it out of the local newspapers and all that kind of stuff. Because her husband was a very prominent lawyer. At the end of this movie, what comes to pass, and this is the good big twist of this movie, and I thought it was very well done, it's also in the book, the Moonlight Man is actually a real person, and the actor that plays the Moonlight Man in this flick is the actor who plays the giant in Twin Peaks. And he's real. He's a real person. He was actually a serial killer running through the state of Maine during this time, and what he would do is he would kill couples. He would only butcher the men. And he would take keepsakes, like, other than jewelry and stuff, he would also take, like, noses and ears and stuff and keep them in jars in his house. Like, real sick, weird stuff. He actually was in her room one of those 2 nights. He burglarized himself in, he saw them, and he thought that she was a hallucination. They also explain at the end of this movie, for the last 6 months, she hasn't been able to sleep at night because when she closes her eyes, she sees the manifestation of this guy. And at the end of the movie, she realizes this actual dude is real, so she actually goes down to the courthouse where he's having his arraignment, and she kind of disrupts everything, and he turns around, and he kind of says, like, oh, you're real, I thought you were a hallucination, in his weird, like, speech. He's actually very deformed, and he can't speak very well because he has mental issues. So the end of this movie is she gets closure to that story as well. It's very well done. It's very effective in terms of psychological horror. I enjoyed it through and through. I think it's definitely worth at least one watch. It's one of the better horror movies I've seen in a while, but it's also one of the best Stephen King film adaptations that I've seen in a while. And I know also this month we're getting a film adaptation of one of my favorite recent short stories that he did in 1922, which is the name of it, and I will be doing a full review of that movie as well. But to recap this whole thing, I'm giving this 1 thumb up. I think it's worth your time. I'm not going to give it 2 thumbs up because some of the story elements I think are a little hard to watch, but overall, I really enjoyed this. I think if you're a fan of Stephen King, if you read this book, you're going to walk out of it very happy. If I would have went to the theater to see this movie, I would have walked out extremely happy with how it all presented itself at the end. 1 thumb up, definitely watch it. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Horrorfest is going to be going all month long. There's going to be film reviews at a very frequent basis. There'll also be a lot of stuff more video game related, as this channel is more video game related than it is film related. But keep tuned here for other things related to Horrorfest in the month of October 2017. As always, remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Until next time.